Hello and welcome back, everybody, and thanks to those who joined us in the the speed networking chat there. It worked really well, and some very interesting connections made there. We've heard so much today about technology, predominantly, I would say, about sort of digital technologies, really, about esports, about media technology. But technology is, of course, has a broader meaning. It applies equally to physical technology. We're delighted now to be joined by David de Behr, who's the Director of Sales Event Services at Aggreko, who are the leading provider of energy and heating and ventilation for major events. Their technology is groundbreaking. Now, the title of the panel is Can Innovations in Physical Technology Balance Sustainability with Cost? He's joined by Karlan, Jessen, who's the head of sustainability and at Lake Placid 2023 World University Games, Steve Stum from NASCAR Productions, and Louw from ConCom. He's a senior technical producer there. And to moderate the panel is Dave Crump, who's board member of our supporting partner, the Association of Global Event Suppliers. So over to you, Dave. Thank you.
Hello, and good morning or good afternoon, everybody, depending on where you are in the world and where you're joining us from. And welcome to this panel session. I thought I would kick off by just allowing each of my four panelists to do a brief introduction, explaining a little bit about who they are, and then I've got a number of questions that I'm going to pose and hopefully stimulate some interesting dialogue. We'd welcome input from the floor, so please feel free to chime in with your own questions or comments. So to kick off, I'll tell you a little bit about myself. As Ben just explained, I'm chairing or moderating this panel as a board member of the Association of Global Event Suppliers. We're a trade association representing the supply chain, particularly around everything overlay related and technology related to major global events. And our primary activities are kind of networking, education, and informing host cities and organizing committees to try and help the process of transferring knowledge and making the whole delivery of major events easier and ultimately therefore more sustainable. We do have a couple of very good and highly regarded guides around temporary overlay and the whole planning, procurement and delivery process, and we're just in the process of publishing a third guide which I'd highly recommend on sustainability. So that's just a little bit about Aegis and a bit of a plug for Aegis. I'd recommend anybody in the supply chain or potential host cities to check us out and maybe consider becoming involved. In my day job, I have been involved in all things audiovisual at event delivery for the last 40 or so years. I run now a fairly major AV company based in Europe, but we're a global organization, and we cover everything from corporate events, 200 or 300 people in a hotel ballroom, right through concert touring, festivals, big music and spectaculars. Many of you might have seen the Jubilee recently, that the Queen's Jubilee in London, that was one of ours, and a lot of major sports through PGA Golf, World Athletics, that kind of stuff. We're at Wimbledon, and we're a big player in the Olympics. Since 2012, we've been Panasonic's delivery partner for all of the AV solutions across Olympic deliveries. And in fact, I'm showing my age a bit, but I think my first Olympics was Calgary in 1988. So I've been doing this a while. So that's a little bit about me. I'll hand over to Karlan first of all. She can tell you a little bit about who she is and her role, and then we'll go around the table through Greg and Steve and David. Over to you, Karlan.
Great, thank you, Dave. And I'm excited to be here, and I'm excited to learn some new things today as well. So I'm the head of legacy and sustainability for the FISU Lake Placid World University Games taking place in January of 2023. And this is only the third time these games have been hosted in the United States, but I've been involved in other large-scale events, most recently in the Special Olympics USA Games in Seattle, and the Courage Classic Bicycle Tour, which is a 3-day, 3 mountain pass tour as well. And in every case, I've been involved with focusing on sustainability and reducing our overall impact. These large-scale multi-sport events have a lot of complexity to them, especially with the temporary infrastructure. So that's kind of what I've been learning about, focusing on, and hoping to always share best practices with other events.
Great, thanks, Karlan. Do you want to follow on, Steve?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. Glad to be here. Like Dave, I was an old broadcast guy, camera guy from way back in the day. Been in the sport of NASCAR for over 35 years. Seen a lot of change in the sport, and all sports really, how they go together, how they're produced, how they're presented to the world and their audience. We look at how it's changed, right? You used to do one big broadcast that would go to everybody, and we've changed recently to more digital, social, and you're doing multiple broadcasts to everybody so they can customize their broadcast to how they want to see it. It takes a lot of people, a lot of manpower, a lot of resources to do that. We work well with our industry, the race teams, the drivers, the broadcasters, everybody it takes to put it on to do things more efficiently. I was told years ago by one of my mentors it was not my job to try to save money, it's my job to spend it more efficiently, and I'm really good at spending money in technology and broadcast. It's not hard to do that sometimes. So, but we do look at how do you do things differently? How do we change the world? How do we change our philosophy? How to look at a broadcast, get the content, the data out to the people you need. We have some really great partners in the sport that help us out, and we're looking at the future of how do we be more efficient, more sustainable, more friendly to the environment, so we can keep going and doing things like that. A lot of remote production and remote broadcasting, centralized production things we're looking at. So we are making a difference. We've been doing that for a while. When COVID hit, we were in a really good spot with our remote production. So we moved on, and it helped us then. It's helping us now, and we're looking at the future, new things that we're going to be doing in the next couple of years to be even better at our broadcast, to deliver to our fans.
Great, thanks. And Greg, you want to just
thanks, Dave.
who you are and what you do?
Yeah, thank you, Dave, and I appreciate having me on here. I'm a technical producer for live sporting events, working for a company called ConCom, based out of Avon, Connecticut. But we do global sports all around the world. Just came back from Singapore. I'll be heading to Amsterdam with an event domestically in between that. And as we spoke a little earlier, but I will be using some of Dave's company's technology on our events, on all three of these events that I mentioned. But to follow up what Steve said, the industry really took a change after the pandemic, and people looked to do these remote home productions. They were starting to happen on a smaller scale where there wasn't budgets in a lower end college game. But now, once that happened, once the pandemic hit, big productions were looking to see how they could capitalize on that technology, and I think they did a really good job across the board, from the NHL, the NBA, all the big players, NASCAR, yourself. But I think it's changed now that I don't want to say the pandemic's over, but it's definitely a different world than it was 2 years ago. And seeing a little bit of a reversal where there's a lot of big productions and there's a starving environment from the consumers to really get out there and get to these events. And it's creating a demand of larger on-site productions. So that's what we're seeing in our end. And I'm curious to see, I really like to hear from Aggreko and see what they're doing on their end. As far as the work we do involves oftentimes a lot of generators to power a whole compound. And I'm curious to see what technology they have to help improve those things for the environment.
That's a great segue. Our introduction, David.
Hello, good afternoon.
Clearly about power and diesel.
Yeah, So good afternoon. Thanks, Dave. Thanks, Greg. David Behr, Head of Sales for Aggreko Event Services within Aggreko. I've been 22 years with Aggreko in different roles. But at the moment, like Greg said it, out of COVID, back on the field, my role is preliminary to implement Aggreko's zero carbon commitments in our strategy in events across the group. So we are targeting accounts which are ready to go on the road with us. And I think that's what we're going to discuss today is, new technology starts to be there in energy also, but obviously it comes with different services and a different price. And I think that's what we're gonna discuss today.
Great, thanks. And I thought it would be really good to try and kind of kick off the conversation with you and just get a feel for some of the ideas and the actions you're taking now to address sustainability around next year's games. I mean, clearly staging a major winter games uses lots of power, lots of energy, all of that kind of stuff. You're in a very environmentally sensitive position, so it'd be really good to understand a little bit about how you're managing that and some of the initiatives and how you balance those challenges and objectives with the finance department and the budget, because they don't always dovetail perfectly. So
yeah, thank you. So as I mentioned in the introduction, large-scale multi-sport events are tricky because of their just inherent complexity. And then you add to that typically they're hosted in a different city every 2 or 4 years. And so the infrastructure isn't always permanent. While we might be using some existing stadiums, existing venues for skiing and hockey rinks, we do have to create temporary infrastructure for festival areas, for medical and for security needs, transportation hubs. And so all of those areas that are temporary need infrastructure, and as well, it's winter. So we have to heat those places. Often they're far from shore power. So that means bringing in generators. And so we're really struggling with how to stay true to our sustainability initiatives and our 6 pillars, while also presenting a high-class production with the technology that we do have. We do have reducing and mitigating our carbon footprint as one of those sustainability pillars. And we also have to look at the fact that we are in a location that is more remote than usual for FISU to host a winter game. So we're flying in over 2,500 athletes and delegates, and that's also an additional carbon footprint. So offsetting not only the travel, but also all of those additional requirements for the temporary infrastructure. All challenging. In fact, I was on a call yesterday exploring the idea of substituting fuel-based generators for electric batteries. And the challenge with that, of course, is the cold temperatures. In addition, we can't use temporary solar because of snowpack and cloud cover. It's just not practical, mostly because of the snow. So these are just all issues that I think are interesting to talk about now, because when an event only takes place every 2 or 4 years, that means that 2 years from now and 4 years from now, some of this new technology will be very mainstream. And so it's exciting to see, what can we pilot now and what will be mainstream 4 years from now. And these are all the questions.
Yeah. I was interested when we talked in advance of this discussion. We talked a little bit about electric vehicles and electric buses and all of that kind of thing, which clearly is becoming very mainstream in our day-to-day lives. But I was interested in the sort of balance between whether it's vehicles or any other battery technology, you've still got to charge it. You quite possibly have got to charge it and move it to get it closer to the site location, particularly if you're in a mountain environment. And and I guess this is relevant to David. I mean, even the charging uses fossil fuels probably to do that charging in the first place. And is there even availability today of sufficient electric buses or electric vehicles to support an event like this when they're still being rolled out in our towns and cities, but they're not I would imagine there's not surplus available to support events.
Yeah, what's interesting about that, very good points. And so for our games, what we're looking at is showcasing a few really high technology electric buses and using them in short routes with high visibility so that people can understand that those buses are available, they do work in the winter, and they're very comfortable and clean. So to have a full fleet is not an opportunity that we have, but we're going to showcase hopefully at least one, possibly two large buses. It's all a supply chain issue. Some of the companies are excited to showcase the buses, but they won't have them off the assembly line yet. So, and in terms of the fleet vehicles that we'll be requiring, we have a great opportunity to work with a lot of vehicle makers and rental car companies who also have supply chain challenges. So the hybrid and the full electric vehicles are, like you said, they're not fully available, but if they were, they would be a great solution for us. We're very fortunate in the Adirondack region to have over 90% of our power is supplied by solar and hydroelectric. So we do have very clean, renewable energy in this area. And I imagine in other areas that we're still relying on high coal power or other not as clean, renewable as we have might be a different argument. But we have the charging infrastructure, and where we don't have it, we can bring it in through grid on a skid or temporary charging. So there's a few really exciting new options out there that are excited to play in this space and work with us. So we'll see what happens.
Okay. And just, I appreciate the whole supply chain issue, but, and I don't know whether you can answer this, but kind of hypothetically, if there were loads of electric vehicles available, do you think would there be an incremental cost of operating electric vehicles versus traditional internal combustion engines? And is that a cost that the event can afford and would support because of the sustainability obligations and criteria? Because the subject of this panel is kind of balancing the cost. We all want to do it. It's just, can we afford to be as sustainable as we want to be?
Yeah, so for us, in every case, the electric power would be cheaper than the combustion power, only because I think it's unique to this area because we have a very efficient and pretty cheap electric supply. That is something incredibly unique to Lake Placid because of the way our electric grid is set up. So I can't say it would be true for every city, but when we've balanced the cost of the diesel and gas fueled generators against the cost of electric batteries, if we could use them. And in every case, it's thousands of dollars cheaper. And then the thing with the electric vehicles is that, of course, what we're looking at is in-kind value coming from corporate partnerships. So an apples to apples comparison, I can't say, but I do know that there's so much cost involved with bringing in, temporary fueling stations for a fleet of vehicles, and maintaining, the gas prices right now are in some places over $6 a gallon for us. So right at this moment in time, it would be cheaper to run electric.
Okay, good. That's interesting. And I think really positive.
If I could ask a question, but how much of that do you think is directly related to the current situation of fuel in the world versus if it was $3 a gallon, would it be closer?
Again, without having run the exact math on that, what I can say is that the electricity in our region is incrementally cheaper than in a lot of areas. So for us in Lake
Right.
Placid, in this Adirondack region, yes. In some municipalities, it would be, a balancing act. However, when we set our goals, our sustainability goals, we also have to consider the value of achieving those goals and balance that against the financial cost. So what's more important to us? Is it the saving of the money? Is it raising more money in the budget so that we can reach those goals? That's the balancing act that event producers have to consider.
And I'm curious, was choosing Lake Placid that one of the factors, the fact that they had 90% renewable energy?
I don't think it was considered in the bid process initially. I don't know the exact details of that original bid. I think that one of the factors in choosing Lake Placid was the fact that we have existing venues that have been maintained and in fact are being upgraded since the 1980 Olympic Games. So whereas a lot of cities might have to construct some brand new facilities, we had those in place, which is also a sustainability consideration on the part of FISU. Going into a city and requiring them to build a brand new ice arena or a brand new ski jump or, some sort of really expensive infrastructure is sometimes, has a pretty big impact on the community as well as being cost prohibitive.
Right. And I wonder, David, going forward in Olympics and events like Karlan's doing, if that becomes a factor in making the decision, is how is the local power generated and how does it work and how can it be efficient to their project? Could become a factor in the bid, I would think.
Yeah, so certainly Paris 2024, for example, has the aim to not run one generator on the Olympics, and they also have committed through the grid network in France to bring 100% renewable grid to each venue.
Really?
Yeah, I think, well, because we are talking a bit of energy, we have quite an interesting panel because we have Karlan, indeed, which has a one-off major event, drops in a region. We have Aggreko, which you could say tours a massive amount of equipment in one place for one night or a couple of nights. Steve has a very known recurrent, let's say his main flag event is a very known recurrent year after year event. And Dave basically with his company operates every week on multiple events. So we have these 4 case studies. And if you just put the energy in the middle, I think Steve is in the best place with his flagship event because year after year, he can basically, control more and more his supply chain on energy efficiency because it starts there. I mean, at the end, energy is, on an event is just a plus of different stakeholders. So Steve is on his fixed circuit, or I don't know if it's fixed, sorry, but has his event, which he knows very well. And most probably, and he can talk about it later on, he will have quite a decent control on his stakeholders year after year to try to make them energy efficient, which means that normally his energy consumption should go down year after year as long as he can control and put pressure on his stakeholders, leaving new technology apart in energy. For you, Greg, it's a bit more difficult because you are touring massive amounts of power for one night in a venue. So obviously, I don't know what the choice of a venue is for ConCom, but maybe in the future, I would bounce the ball back. You could also look at your venues if grid power is coming from renewables. Like in Copenhagen, or in Denmark, you're 100% sure because the country is running on 100% renewable grid. For Karlan, it's much more difficult in the way that, first of all, winters are not the most easy one to make sustainable, just because of like all the factors she has said: snow, cold, distances, mountains, this type of stuff. So it's one of the most difficult ones. But to come back to what you said, if the grid is coming from renewable, you could also, sometimes we need to step away from temporary energy in events, it's generators. I mean, more and more events are going on the grid, because in more and more countries, the grid is becoming much more reliable, which means that companies like us has also an whole range of temporary high voltage equipment. So basically we pick up the grid and we transform it back to low voltage and then just distribute. Now, you need to have confidence in the grid, but in these times, and with all the commitments all the organizations have, I think it's something we need to step away, that we need backup of backup of backup. We in mature countries, we should most of the time believe the reliability of the grid. If you start from there, like Karlan was saying for her event, and you have a lot of existing venues, yeah, you can start to see, and it all starts with engineering. That's also one of the messages I want to say, which will be easier for Steve with a recurrent event, is that, yeah, you can really engineer to the truth if you have the right people doing it. And that starts way in advance. It's engineering in advance, see what's available, see what's reliable, and then basically start to see from there, what can you add? And what can you add in temporary energy in events? Worst case, it's still a diesel generator. Now, at least in my company, we are working, or we are trying to invest to the latest technology, which means that we have rolled out in the States all the stage 5s, like we call them, which is the latest technology, but it's still fossil fuel burning generators. Next step is biodiesel. We call it HVO. Very, very easy to find good quality HVO and traceable in Europe. Less easy in the States. We know California, no problem. The region of San Francisco is starting, but apart from that, it becomes a part of the West Coast. It starts to be very difficult to bring HVO somewhere in the States. Also not very effective to have the trucks driving. After that, in the States, propane and natural gas systems, but then Karlan already said it, yeah, price is going up, of course. But are much cleaner than from the fossil fuels. Propane and natural gas are the cleanest. So that's an option, certainly, for an event like the one from Karlan.
And David, is that available in large volume? Can you?
Yes, it is. It is in the States. In the States, we cannot do it in Europe, but in the States we are doing big broadcast shows. But it's for long rental. So basically, this type of I don't know, Netflix kitchen things, where you have like a 2, 3, 4 months hire. Natural gas systems, we install them for events. Yeah. Very safely,
and cost effective. Cost
effective before the prices were, like Karlan said, the prices were going up on everything, obviously. Now, and then just to finish, then we come into the fancy things. Now, when Karlan is saying battery, battery is only storage. You still need a source. So, which means that you need a source to load up the batteries, and then the batteries can take over. The other one is UPSs. If you have a grid, you can put the UPS in between. That gives you your backup. And then we come to what the niche, the very niche. What we are doing at the moment is solar. But just to give you an idea, you need to roll out a 100-meter long solar field of 6 meters wide to have, with full Middle East, some 60 kilowatts. We have just done on a Paris festival called Wheel of Green, we have just done the lights of a little stage with it. So the solar goes to a battery unit and then goes to the stage. So that's starting, but it's still very, very small loads. And the last one, the one everybody believes it's the gold and it will save us, is hydrogen. But the problem with hydrogen is that, one, it's super expensive. Two, the supply is nowhere. And 3, it's again small capacities, because it needs a lot of big trailers just to get a couple of kilowatts out of an hydrogen fuel cell. So
Sorry, I was just going to jump in there on all the generator stuff, and then we must move on to a couple of other topics. But by the time you install hundreds of meters of solar, or have great big battery banks and UPSs to store that and provide the backups that you need if you're going to be on the grid or whatever, does that not outweigh a lot of the sustainability benefits, because you've got to get all that bulky, heavy stuff to the site, get it away again, and that's all for the time being going to come on diesel trucks, and maybe even fly on aeroplanes.
Airplanes we try to avoid. That would not work with the commitments we have towards our customers. But I think I'm open to all the other panels. But look, it is possible. It starts with engineering. It starts with your controlling your stakeholders. It's a whole chain. I mean, if everybody just double up what they need, I mean, it's going to be very difficult to be sustainable. So and that goes for trash, that goes for energy, that goes for water, that goes for everything. So it's also the way we organize events. It starts also with how fat do you want to be in what you provide, or how slim you want to be, and I think that's the start of everything. From there on, you can reduce on all your layers, and the industry, because I didn't say, but I'm also with Dave, a board member of Aegis, so representing the whole industry in events. There are solutions, but it starts with your stakeholders.
I have an interesting question, if I could ask for Steve.
Yeah, sure.
On the topic of fuel, I know that F1 has created an electric version of that race. Is there any talk in NASCAR of doing electric car races?
Yeah, we're exploring right now, doing some electric vehicles. We're kind of in the exploratory mode. You might see some races in the next year or two, more exhibition races, right? The problem we have, a lot of our tracks, they're all ovals, 1.5 mile ovals, so you don't let off the gas much. You have to let off the gas to recharge it. So we'll strategically pick a couple of short tracks where you're off the gas, and some road courses, things like that we're going to. But for sure, looking at that, and we fight the same battles as everybody else with the generators. I don't know batteries the right way, because you got to dispose of the batteries at some point. Hydrogen, we've tested with hydrogen. It's super expensive. I don't know that there's a right solution. And mine, I get 30 mobile units moving around the country 38 weeks a year. And we got to be reliable. I mean, I'd love to think about having natural gas come into every facility, but all of our facilities are out in the rural areas and not easy to get to, and maybe don't have natural gas. And we all know that if we don't have power, we don't have a show. So it's a puzzle for sure to figure out what the right way to go is.
And do those circuits have enough grid power to run predominantly on grid, or are you still?
No,
my view is
we should have grid power, but we're out in the middle of, like I said, out in the rural areas. We're away from town, where land's cheap and noise doesn't matter. So to bring in enough shore power to run off the grids is not feasible. We're still running on generators. We've reduced generators on site from 6 to 4, and looking to go down to 2. But then what's the backup? And that's why we've gone more to remote centralized production.
Yeah, well, that was the next area I wanted to really try and cover off a bit, with Steve and to some extent the transition to remote and centralized production. I feel it's been accelerated by COVID. I know Formula One have done a lot of it, and that massively reduces the number of people that are traveling to site and the amount of equipment that's going to site. Love to hear a bit more from you, Steve and Greg, about how that's working in your two fields, and the cost analysis and the cost of the connectivity. So
yeah, we started years ago kind of as an experiment, just kind of thought that's where it was going to go, and could you save some money, and played with it over satellite, and we got connectivity in, and now we have great partners with AT&T and Comcast and those guys who put multi-100 gig circuits into our tracks that we can do whatever we need to. NEP's been a great partner with us in designing trucks and workflows and how we do it. And when COVID hit, like I said earlier, we were in a good position to move back and do remote production. So we kept going, never missed a beat. Our broadcast partners, Fox, NBC, we put people in Pittsburgh, people in LA, people on site, and they all connected and ran their EVSs and audio boards and things like that. And some of that still happens today, a lot of it. We do a show in NASCAR, our sports car series, IMSA, 24-hour race in Daytona in February into January, beginning of February. 24-hour race, 40 cameras, several hundred audio things, 30-some channels of comms, all done remotely in Charlotte. The only thing on site are the camera guys and the audio guys. And I'm sure I can get an accountant, finance people to talk, and you can spin it one way or the other. On the financial part of it, you have to have the staff at home and the facilities at home to make it work. So we're struggling on that part of it, but we've had a lot of freelance people move to Charlotte because of the amount of work we're doing here in the building. They would rather work in the building than travel and be out in a dirty, dusty TV compound in the middle of nowhere, living in a hotel room 5 nights a week. So we've been very successful at it. We're not going backwards. We've moved and done all of our screen production. Jumbotron Fan Entertainment is all done from home. All of our international shows are done from home. We're cutting down on site. The next broadcast deal we're doing next year is the next broadcast rights negotiations. So I'm sure there'll be a lot more remote stuff going on. We're building out a facility that's focused on remote live event production. So you still have to have the people on site to do the show. The base of it, the show is still on site. The race cars and the teams and all that are on site. We have to give them what they need to do their business, and we've done a very good job. It's just a different method of thinking, and we're going forward with it. We're not moving everything back to site anytime soon.
Yeah, that's interesting because Greg, I know when you and I talked a couple of weeks back, you were saying that although you had been doing a lot remote, you were finding much more pressure to get back on site, and I certainly see on Europe, the European Tour Golf, that contrary to what Steve's saying there, I think a lot of the production team want to get back on site. They're slightly different environment. They're probably going to a nice golf course in Spain rather than sitting in some suburb of London. But I think there's actually a part of it is driven by those people. Yeah, they just want to get away. They enjoy going and traveling and spending time in a nice hotel in a resort type location, which is not necessarily a dusty NASCAR circuit. But it'd be good, interesting to get your take on how you're with the ConCom events moving back into
right.
Into on site.
Golfing golf is sort of the exception, right? Because you're always going to somewhere nice in a warm weather and a warm environment, theoretically. But using our UFC property that we package, for example, during the pandemic, they were building a facility at the time, and the pandemic hit, and the facility was 75% done. So what we did is we pulled in trucks into their facility, and that sat at their facility until they finished it. And we were able to do all the shows, kind of like the WWE model, where they brought everything to one place. So we didn't have to do a Remy. We were actually doing it from their room. Then they finished the control room, and then they started doing the shows from the control room. We didn't need those trucks anymore. So that worked out well. But once we were able to, they were just dying to get out and get to these people who were starving for consumption of some real live events. And once the world started to open up again, they just got out there as much as they could. And the situation for us is, as much as the live broadcast is important, the in-house production is just as important, and it's gotten just involved. If you've gone to a hockey game or any of these NBA games recently, it's a whole experience now when you go there. It's not just the game, the LED, the projection mapping on the ice. It's really an entertainment, and you're paying big dollars, so you got to fulfill these people's needs, So it's hard for us to really do a remote. We've looked into it, and it will happen, but it's hard for us to do a Remy of our size because we have a whole in-house crew that just cuts a live show in-house. And those people and that producer really needs to be sitting in the crowd, feeling the energy. We have a DJ in there that, it really loses it if you're not on site for that. But in regards to, I see us potentially going down the road where ESPN does, where you have graphics and EVS remoted. The challenge for UFC is there isn't a lot of core crew that lives in Vegas. So if it's a domestic show and we're doing a Remy, we still have to fly a crew to Vegas. So we might as well just fly them to the site. it doesn't pay at this point. But where it may come into play is places that we're looking at is like in Brazil. Brazil is, we would go there 2-3 times a year before the pandemic because that sport is very prevalent. Now, they don't have really good facilities there, and we've always struggled with the OBs down there. So we're probably going to do a test, a proof of concept, hopefully this fall, and maybe try and produce a show that is a Remy where it's still when you're traveling internationally, the travel is almost doubled these days. So there would be some cost savings for us to fly the crew to Vegas and then just have the ancillary, the cameras, the audio. But as Steve can contest, you're still dealing with, if talent's on site, you're dealing with a delay of the mix minus back to their ear. So you do have to have someone you got to make that up on site so you don't have those big challenges. So Remy's are really, really good for, like we said, a low-end college football where ESPN has 3 or 4 available studios and they can fill it with their people. But it's not it becomes more challenging on these larger scale events, especially a pay-per-view of sorts, where we deal with it a lot. But in the esports world, they're starting to get more. They'll do some of their bigger scale shows, but they have a whole IT team that travels out, and they have a trailer full of IT. They're encoding, their IP encoding, and they got to, it's kind of a wash because you're sending other people that, you're sending different technicians as opposed to producers. You know what I'm saying?
Yep, absolutely. And I think and I got a message during that we've been given an extra 5 minutes. So they clearly think this is or hopefully they think it's an interesting panel, which is good.
We must be compelling.
And I think, Greg, you made the point there about the audience experience at the event, and we're all involved one way or another in delivering these live shows, and we all see them getting bigger and more complex. I think there's no question, certainly in my field, the LED screens are becoming massively more energy efficient. Lighting is all transitioning over to LED rather than halogen. So, in theory, there's less power being used, but the productions are getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And there are more projectors and more LED screens and bigger sound systems. And to my mind, there's more and more generators. You don't see fewer generators behind the stage at these events. And it's great for business, and I'm in business of supplying all this equipment, but how do we balance this? But how do the event organizers, the bands, the promoters? Do we think they can balance their sustainability obligations and conscience and everything else with productions that are bigger and bigger? There's 25 trucks where there used to be 10. There's et cetera, et cetera. Is at some point, is public pressure going to put a check on that? And are we going to have to wind back again, or is it going to keep growing?
I don't know. You always hear the common joke about, you get this performer who's all sustainable and green and talks about it in his concert and then gets off in his private jet and leaves.
Yeah. Yep.
I don't have to figure something out. Like our NASCAR stuff, there's pre-race shows and stages and broadcast compounds, and we're building a new facility. We own like 18 of our own facilities. We're building a new racetrack in California. And what I heard yesterday was in California, you can't have combustion engines in 2024, 2025. David may know more about that than me, but that's the first I heard that. So that's going to push how do we get power to more places around a big facility, a mile racetrack, right? It's a lot bigger than a hockey rink or basketball arena. How do we get power off the grid to all those places around the track and make it, or hydrogen or something that's going to be some kind of backup? We're going to have to figure it out because they're going to force us to.
So I wonder, Steve, if there's been any exploration, especially since NASCAR has a lot of facilities in the South. What is the exploration into introducing localized solar energy plants near the NASCAR facilities?
There's a lot of our tracks that we obviously have a lot of land around our tracks 1,000 acres a tract or something like that, 500 to 1,000 acres. A lot of tracts have put in solar power, solar panels, solar farms. It's just not enough that feeds back into the grid. It's just not enough to sustain the amount of power we use on a weekend. So you're kind of trickling back into the grid, into the system. You're getting credits for it. We're doing what we can, but it's just not enough to run a depend on at this point.
But I think David said it. I'm sorry. David said they're doing that in certain locations, but maybe it just does the lights for the grandstand. But at least it's a start.
Yeah,
It's a start.
it's like yeah. I think that's how you have to see it. The energy transition is a bit of everything. It's like at your home, some have solar panels, some are installing a battery now to take. So it's starting with something. Everything what you can do helps something. And I think you're right. The technology is not there. They're gonna enforce some laws in the next years, and we're gonna have to see where the bottleneck is, because at the end the events have to go on, and they will go on, and then I think it's gonna be a mix of a lot of things. I think grid is gonna become more and more important, like I said, and then everything what cannot be on grid remotely, like you all said, will have to be compensated by a mix of things, but again, to come to the start of our panel, is that all of that, and Karlan has said it, has a price at this moment. It is new technology. If you compare the price of the rental of a diesel generator against a battery pack, or even going with solar or hydrogen, it's like in the time where the Teslas were coming out. It's a big difference. It's a big difference.
And there's no magic bullet that's going to fix everything, right? I think I mentioned we're building a facility. We're not going to put gear in our facility. We're going to connect centralized production to NEP's facility in Dallas, internet. We're kind of shifting the power. We're not going to use it in Charlotte. We're going to use it in Dallas, but at least in Dallas, they can share the power load between multiple customers. Maybe Greg's going to use those switchers and EVSs remotely somehow one day, and it all will help out. But it reduces our load in Charlotte, and we can put some solar panels on the roof and make it look good. And certainly won't get enough solar power to run the facility, but it's helping, and we're shifting that power load and trying to help where we can.
Okay.
I wonder about technology. I just want to ask one more question that's general. What is the opportunity to reduce the power demand for some of the equipment? Like, when will that be upgraded so it uses
I think very briefly, I think, and I know we're going to get cut off in a sec, so I think that's happening all the time. All the technology is getting far less power hungry, but to my point a few minutes ago, we're just using more of it. So a modern day LED lighting fixture uses a fraction of what a lighting fixture a few years ago did, but you go to a show and there's thousands of lights where there used to be only hundreds, and the LED screens are getting more efficient, but they're getting bigger, and that kind of goes up exponentially. I know we have run out of time. We'll be cut away from any minute. I'd just like to thank all of you for your time. I think David's comment a few seconds ago, there's no magic bullet, probably sums up a lot of what we've talked about. So thank you very much, all four of you, for your time. I've enjoyed it. I hope our audience have enjoyed it, and we'll hand back to Ben in his studio.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thanks to all the panelists there. And yes, you're right. David de Behr summed it up nicely there. I think it's looking like a mix of sources will be required in the future. And it's interesting that the panel sort of came round to concluding on the first principle of sustainability, which is reduce. However, human nature is that if you can do something for less, then you do more of it. I guess it's up to the mega events industry to deal with that in a responsible way as we go forward. So thanks again for that fascinating discussion about the physical technology that drives these events and how we can do that efficiently and sustainably. So we're going to take a short break now before we introduce the next panel, which is all about fostering impact, legacy, and DEI through major events. So see you back here in about 15 minutes for that one. Thank you very much.